So, first of all, welcome. And I want to begin today by making a dedication. This discussion today and the learning we're going to be doing today is dedicated as a schus, as a special merit for Menisha Schouten. May she be blessed with bracha vehatzlacha on her journey. And this learning is very relevant to all of us because we are all in the process of transformation. And that actually is the job of a Jew. And frankly, it's the job of every human being on earth. So we are going to, oh, somebody's messaging me probably because they don't have the link. Yes. Okay, I can't send it now. We are going to be exploring the story of Ruth from a particular perspective. Ruth is the most famous convert to Judaism. And many women who convert to Judaism take the name Ruth. If you would like to learn more about Megillat Ruth, the scroll of Ruth, the book of Ruth, I will be putting in the video link when I post this on YouTube, a link to a shir that's very detailed about the progression of her story. Today, we're going to be taking her story from a particular angle and perspective. Now, Ruth, before she became a Jew, was a Moabite. And this is very relevant to this story and to the reason why we celebrate this on Shavuot, as I'll get to. Shavuot is both the birthday and the yahrzeit of King David. And we are told that we read Megillat Ruth on the second day of Shavuot because of this, because of the connection to his birthday and yahrzeit, because she is his great-grandmother. Also, I just want to make a note that Rebbe Nachman, who was himself the descendant of King David, because Baal Shem Tov was a descendant of King David, and Baal Shem Tov was the great-grandfather of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. And the Baal Shem Tov also, his Halula, his yahrzeit is also on Shavuot. Now, the other reasons that we read the scroll of Ruth on the holiday of Shavuot is because Ruth centers around the harvest, which occurs during this time, and also because Shavuot is the celebration and commemoration of receiving the Torah from Mount Sinai. And this is what we're commemorating with Shavuot. And in essence, our sages tell us that we were all like converts. Okay, everybody had a conversion to Judaism when we accepted the Torah. Now, even though we were the children of Israel, there was still something akin to a conversion process that went on. And there's a lot of discussion about this in our text. Also, I would like to add that the culmination of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, the receiving of the Torah, in a way is when Moshiach will be revealed. And we are told that the whole world will have knowledge of Hashem. The whole world will know Hashem. And in essence, this is what the Torah is. It's a multimodal gift offering wisdom and knowledge and 613 experiential pathways we call the mitzvot, the commandments, which offer us different ways in which to know Hashem and come closer to him. And of course, King David, and therefore Ruth, they are the ancestors of Moshiach. Okay, and we know that Moshiach is going to come from King David's line. This is very famous. Now, I hope to have some time to discuss David HaMelech, King David, with you. But first, I want to discuss his Savta, his Babi Ruth. So Samuel the prophet, Shmuel Hanavi, wrote the Megillah of Ruth and made it the first of the Ketuvim, the writings in the Tanakh, which come right before Sefer Tehillim, the book of Psalms, obviously in the correct order, because chronologically Ruth came before David. And if Shmuel Hanavi, who was a great prophet, put something in the Tanakh, therefore it's very valuable, very important, and it's holy, and it's a prophecy. So we'll begin with the story of Ruth's life. And we have to begin that with Naomi. Naomi was married to Elimelech, who was her uncle as well. And she and he had two sons, Machlon and Kilion, and they lived in Bethlehem, okay, which was also called Ephrat. And we are told that that Elimelech was an Ephrati, meaning he was an aristocrat, very aristocratic, noble family. He was a great scholar. They were very wealthy, and a famine struck Israel, and it was brutal. And Elimelech wanted to leave Israel during this time of famine. It says for a few reasons. One of the reasons is that he was stingy. He didn't want to give of his produce and his wealth to the people who were struggling. Okay, there's argument about whether this was really the reason or not, but that's one opinion. And so where did he decide to go? To the place that embodied stinginess and selfishness, and that place was Moab, okay, or Moab in English. Now, Naomi, his wife, she really didn't like this idea. She said, listen, we have to go somewhere else. We can't go to Moab. And they had a lot of discussions, and eventually she relented. And she kicked herself for this for a very long time, for over a decade. She regretted it greatly, but she gave in, and they moved to Moab. And Moab, our sages tell us, embody a few negative character traits. I mentioned the stinginess and the selfishness. They were also said to be very cold-hearted, just very unable to step into someone else's shoes, okay, which is the opposite, by the way, of how a Jew is supposed to be, a Jewish trait that we're supposed to cultivate. And they were promiscuous, both the men and the women, which is absolutely considered in total opposition to by everything Jewish, by our holy Torah. Now, most important to our discussion today, Moab was consumed by the personality trait of gaiva, arrogance, haughtiness. They were considered to be, they were considered to view themselves as above and superior to, and they looked down on others. And they looked down on others, not just outside of the Moabites, but their own people they looked down on. There was a very big pecking order. Okay, so they lived there. And then, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, please. Thank you. They lived there, and they, sorry, I got distracted. They lived there, and they, and Elimelech got sick. There was a plague, and he died. And now Naomi was a widow. And at this point, it is said that there was a royal princess from King Eglon, who was king of the Moabites, who she and Kilion, one of Naomi's sons, fell in love, and they decided to get married. And of course, this broke Naomi's heart because she knew if they got married, their children would not be Jewish. She wouldn't have the nachas from Jewish grandchildren out of this marriage. And then a short while later, Machlon married Ruth, who was also obviously Orpah's sister and a royal princess. Now, it's very interesting because at this stage of the game, Ruth and Orpah have very similar behaviors, and we can interpret them both positively. They were very respectful of Judaism. They were very respectful of their mother-in-law, and they lived happily for 10 years, although they did not have children. Okay, there was no children. And after a while, the money that they did have started to run out, and they became poorer and poorer. And to Ruth's and Orpah's credit, they stayed with their husbands. Now, we have to remember, again, these were royal princesses. They were used to the best. Moab was famous for entertainment, theater. These were girls who were used to haute couture. These were girls who were used to the best people and society and music. And here they were living with poor Jews, and they stuck with their husbands. Now, how much of this had to do with Naomi, their mother-in-law, will kind of unpeel as we go along. So eventually, Machlon and Kilion died on the same day. And the three women were brokenhearted and devastated. Now, Naomi, who had been pleasant, but a little bit removed from her daughters-in-law, at this point expressed her love for them. It wasn't their fault. Okay, it wasn't their fault. They weren't Jewish. And while they were married to her sons, it caused her a lot of anguish because, again, she was expecting grandchildren, and she knew the grandchildren wouldn't be Jewish according to halacha. But she was able to restrain herself. And these were very appealing girls, both of them. They were very respectful of Naomi. They were very respectful of being in a Jewish home. They themselves had, after a while, taken on some of the traits of Naomi and lost some of their Moabite tendencies. Okay. Now, if we think about this, I think it's important at this point to pause and say the quality that I want to discuss today is two qualities. One called shiflut, and the other is called anava, which is humility. But we're going to focus on shiflut, which means a kind of awareness of one's lowliness and awareness of one's distance from God. And at some point, we can assume that Ruth, based on the rest of the story, had an awareness that she was, for all her royalty and majesty and splendor, and coming from a wealthy home as well, in education and fashion sense, she was lowly compared to this poor widow, her mother-in-law, Naomi. Why? Naomi had Hashem. Naomi prayed every day. Naomi, who was bitter and sad, we hear later on in the story, and brokenhearted, never lost hope in Hashem and never wavered in her emunah, faith in God, and her bitachon, her trust in God. She didn't waver in this, although she suffered during this very painful time. So anyway, in the middle of the night, one night, Naomi decides, I'm going to go home now. She heard the famine was over, and she just wanted to be in Israel. She didn't want to live. She never wanted to step foot outside of the Holy Land. And she packed up a rucksack with some clothing and some snacks for the road and started out the door. And we're told, Medrash, that the girls noticed she was missing and ran after her. And they told Naomi, we're coming with you. We're not staying here. You're our beloved mother-in-law. You're a mother to us. And we can only imagine what their mother must have been like. Okay, the typical classic, perhaps narcissistic mother, caught up in the glamour of her life. Again, a Moabite through and through. And they really don't want to leave Naomi. And Naomi tells them, please leave me. Please leave me. I'm a poor widow. I'm not going to be able to take care of you. I lost my house in Israel. It's been a very long time. We're going to be beggars. Go home. And Orpah cried and told Naomi she loved her. She wanted to stay with her. And Naomi put her foot down. And Orpah kissed her and left. Now, Orpah's story is very interesting. And if you want to learn her story, you can pay attention to the Megillah as we read it. And on this Shavuot, the second day. And you can also, again, the video that I'm going to link to as this is posted on the YouTube channel. Now, Naomi, on the other hand, Orpah kissed Naomi, but Ruth, on the other hand, hugged Naomi, clung to her and wouldn't leave. She said, I'm not letting you go. You are my role model. You're my beloved mother to me. And I have grown so much from being with you. I don't want to take a step backwards. Now, Naomi said to her, says the Midrash, it's not going to be fun coming with me. And Ruth said, I want to be a Jew. Essentially, she said, don't ask me to leave you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So essentially, she was expressing her desire to convert. And Naomi said, listen, you're not going to want to be a full-fledged Jew, okay? There's no empty amusements. It's not a party life. There's a lot of restrictions, okay? And it's, especially in our condition. Judaism is wonderful, it's beautiful, but especially in our condition as beggars, as really down and out people, we're going to have a very, very difficult time. And, she didn't say to her openly that people aren't going to marry you, but at that time, there was a law that a Moabite was not allowed to marry into a Moabite convert, was not allowed to marry into a Jewish family. So why was this? So we need to take a step back and look at the source very briefly of the nation of Moab. So the nation of Moab comes from Lot and one of his daughters. It's a very, very lowly and infamous and even repulsive beginning. And it's known that this daughter called the son born from the union with her father Moab, which means from my father, which is a very brazen way of describing this misadventure. And there's another, she has a sister as well. And our sages tell us that it's likely that Ruth was a Gilgul, a reincarnation of this daughter. And there's a lot of Kabbalah about this. We're not going to get to it today, maybe next year, maybe another time. So anyway, at this point, Naomi doesn't tell her, you'll never be able to get a husband. She's a young woman, Ruth. She had to be in her 30s, okay? And she could get married again and have children. And Naomi didn't want to hurt her feelings, okay? But she relented because she saw Ruth's sincerity. And she saw that she wasn't following her sister anyway. Now, in order to travel on this road, the sages say that it was around, they figured out it's around 70 kilometers, approximately 42 miles, and it took them 6 days to get there. That's one opinion. But in order to travel on this road from Moab until they got to Israel, where it was safe, there were bandits, rapists, just robbers. It was a dangerous road, and women would never, ever walk alone without the protection of men. So what they did was they found some old raggy men's clothes. Maybe, I don't know how, maybe Naomi had packed some of Elimelech's clothes just for this, or her Machlon's or Kilyon's clothes, just for such an eventuality that they'd be taking this road. And Ruth had the humility, this great princess, this high fashion princess, had the humility to be able to don these dirty, raggy, old men's clothes and wear them. This was a woman who was used to perfume baths all the time, to wear them as they made their way to Israel. They travel along the road. They get there. The townsfolk recognize Naomi. And they said, oh, you poor thing, you're suffering so much. And Ruth has an opportunity to watch another example of Naomi's holy behavior, good character, because Naomi says, don't feel sorry for me, to the people who are all putting their arms around her and saying, oh, poor Naomi. She says, you can call me Mara, which means bitter, because I'm bitter. She says, but what I'm really bitter about is my poor judgment and my misdeeds. How? Because I should have protested and put my foot down without relenting when Elimelech said he wanted to go to Moab. She said, this was my great error. She said, I didn't stand my ground. She said, a wife, when something like this that's going to affect the morality and character of a Jewish home, a wife has a right to put her foot down. Okay. We yield to our husbands on many things. Okay, some of us do. Some of us are more feisty. But when it comes to this, we absolutely have a responsibility to put our foot down and to say this is going to bring immorality, selfishness, stinginess, arrogance, all those things that we mentioned about Moab into our home, because whatever environment we're living in is going to affect us, which a woman is the Keret Habayit, the foundation of the home, and she is responsible for the spiritual atmosphere of the home. Yes, we're responsible. Many women like to be responsible for the decor and for the food, the recipes and the menus, but we are responsible for the spiritual atmosphere because it affects not only ourselves, it affects our husbands, children, and all visitors, guests, grandchildren, and so on. So anyway, Naomi and Ruth live by, I don't know, hook or crook, as they say, but fortunately it's harvest time. And during harvest time, the poor come to gather disposed of or left behind stalks of grain that are left in the field. And this is a mitzvah called leket, okay? And the mitzvah is as follows. If a farmer, okay, drops 1 or 2 stalks of grain, he is not allowed to pick them up. He must leave them for the poor. If he drops 3, if he wants to, he can go back and pick them up. But 1 or 2, he must leave them for the poor to come and gather. And there are other agricultural laws of charity as well. We won't go into them today because leket is what's focused on in this story. Now, Naomi tells Ruth that she has a cousin named Boaz. And Boaz is Naomi's husband's Elimelech's nephew also. They were both niece and nephew to Elimelech. And Boaz was a widower. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was a great judge, a shofet. And he had a very pure and fine character. He was, it is said, one of the few people who were utterly devoid of sin. He had completely conquered his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, and he was a widower, and he was also very generous. He didn't watch what people took from his fields. He had many fields. He was very wealthy. He didn't watch. And if his workers dropped 3 grains or even 5 grains, stalks of grains, he said, just leave them. leave them for the poor. And even though there were limits on what a poor person gathering grain could carry, he ignored those limits. He told his workers to look the other way. As a matter of fact, he didn't even look over his fields all that much. He wasn't so concerned. Whatever they took, they took. They needed it. It was fine. So Naomi tells Ruth about Boaz and about the mitzvah of leket. And she says, I am going to go and I'm going to gather stalks of grain for us to eat. And Ruth says, hold on a minute, mother-in-law dear, or mother dear, you are not doing any such thing. I'm a young woman, I'm strong. I'm going to go and do it. And they have an argument, just the same like the argument on the road, but their arguments were out of love. This wasn't the typical argument. And Naomi said, no, you can't go. She said, it's not appropriate for you to go. You're a royal princess. And also, there's some young men in the fields are not such great characters, are going to hit on you and so on and so forth. But Ruth insisted on going. And they could have asked Boaz to just give them help because after all, they were family, but both of them were too proud. They didn't want to be dependent on him. So Ruth went to Boaz's field and also she went there with displaying great humility and a great sense of knowing, again, this quality of shiflut, of knowing her own lowliness. She knew her background by now was lowly. She'd been living with Naomi. She recognized the profound, profound differences. So she did a few things that most of the people coming to the field did not do. First of all, she went to the foreman and asked permission to pick the dropped stalks. There was no permission required, but she wanted to do everything very carefully. Next, she walked to the far side of the field, way out of her way, because there were more men congregated on the near side, and she didn't want to have to be looked at by the men. She was very modest, very sniut. She didn't want men looking at her, and she was very careful about going out of the way to avoid them. She also bent down very discreetly to pick up the grain. She didn't, when she bent down, lift her skirt or even show her arms. All the other women did. They're like, I'm picking grain, I'm picking grain. She was very modest and demure, okay? She didn't talk. Now, this was picking the grain was like a party. They were singing, they were talking, there were people having conversations, shouting across the field. She didn't. And also, she helped the other women collect their grain when she was done with hers. She only took what she needed. She didn't take one stalk of grain extra. Now, Boaz had a Ruach HaKodesh to go to his field. Something, again, I mentioned he didn't really do all that much. And he saw Ruth right away. He noticed her holy aura, how modestly she comported herself. And he saw she only took what was allowed by the strictest law and so on. And he went to speak to her. And he treats her with respect and kindness. And he learns who she is. And she says, I am Ruth HaMoavia, Ruth a Moabite. And he says, don't call yourself Ruth the Moabite. You have a Jewish soul, he tells her, because you have the Jewish trait of kindness and modesty and so on. And he said, listen, my advice to you is to listen to all the rabbis, go to Shiurim, listen to the classes, the Torah classes, and make friends among the Jewish women your age, okay? And she says she's very honored by his advice. And then he invites her to lunch. And she said, I can't have lunch with you. She says, I'm less than a maidservant. She says, thank you, but I can't. But he insists. And he gives her roasted grain. And roasted grain was a rich person's food. And she ate. And he gave her some other food too, with bread dipped in vinegar and so on and so forth. And he says, take this rich roasted grain home to Naomi. And she gets back home to their shack by the side of the road, or maybe they're sleeping rough or in a tent. She gets home and she says, here's what happened today. And then Naomi explains to Ruth the mitzvah of yibum, of levirate marriage, and the idea that a son, a husband who dies childless, his widow should marry the brother or the next closest relative in order to have his children, to perpetuate his name. But there's a way out of it with this mitzvah, which involves a shoe and spitting, and we will go into that another time. You can look it up. So Naomi tells Ruth, here's my plan. I want you to go to Boaz with the idea in mind that you and he are going to have a marriage because of his obligation. And I want you to dress up, perfume yourself. If you brought some dresses, bring your best dress. Go in the middle of the night to the threshing room floor in the barn where he will be sleeping. And when you get there, uncover his feet from his blanket to remind him of Yibum and the Chalitza ceremony with the shoe. And Ruth does so. In the middle of the night. Now, what happens? She grabs it, she uncovers his feet, she touches his feet. He sees what's going on. He wakes up with a start. He's an elderly man too at this point. He's quite old. And he is seized with terror. Why? Does he think she's a burglar? No. He's afraid that he might sin. Here's this beautiful young woman in the barn alone with him at night. Okay, that's his first thought. Then he realizes that she chose him, and he thanks her for not choosing a younger man. Now, we're talking today about Ruth's shiflut, her awareness of her lowliness, which could also be interpreted as distance from Hashem, and also her humility and her modesty. And here is this great shofet, this leader of the generation, humbling himself, aware of his own personal lowliness. Well, lowliness was there. The thing that he identified, look, I'm an old man. And he's thanking this Moabite beggar for all intents and purposes. Amazing. Just think about that. Amazing. What people they were, what role models for us. Okay. Now, they had prophecy. They know that they're going to get married. The court announces that the Moabite conversion law doesn't apply to women, only men. So a female Moabite can marry into the Jewish fold. They get married. Ruth gets pregnant, and Boaz dies, and Ruth gives birth to Oved. And he is named actually by the women of the community. Okay, and that means servant of God. Oved, servant. And everybody sort of comes along to help raise this child. Okay, they even refer to him as Naomi's child because it's her grandson, and she thought she would never have a chance to have a Jewish grandchild. And it's considered like her grandson. Why? Because Boaz is her cousin. Okay, so anyway, Oved was born, and he was born with no need for a brit milah. He didn't need to be circumcised. He was born circumcised. And Oved grows up. He has a son named Yishai, Jesse. Okay. And Yishai has a son named David. And Ruth lived to see King David, anointed king. So we're seeing here a quality in Ruth. Now, again, I want to mention that I said in the beginning that Ruth had many good qualities that our sages praise: her loyalty, her kindness and compassion, her modesty. But somehow in that list, we always seem to forget about her lowliness and humility. So this quality I want to focus on is related so much to King David. And I would like to mention that this past week, in the Psalms for Life class, we are up to Psalm 60. And Vayhashgacha Pratis, one of the verses in the chapter is Moav Sir Rachsi. Moav is my wash basin, which is how Hashem, writes King David, is referring to the Moabites. And it may not even just mean wash basin like a sink. It may even mean a chamber pot. Why is it referred to so lowly? So you know the story of Moab. And the Talmud tells us that this is very important to David. Why is it so important to him? Because the Talmud teaches that no leader should be appointed to any position of authority unless he has a basket full of reptiles on his back, meaning a lowly background. And this recognition of his own lowly background, I mean, he's a descendant of Moab, okay, as well as some other issues that David has in his life. He was accused of being a mamzer. He was accused of being the product of an illicit relation. He wasn't, but he was accused of it. And he was also had a transgression with Bathsheba. This kept him humble, which is why he was such a great king. So anyway, I lost my place. Okay. So anyway, King David had a recognition of his own lowliness, okay, because of his background, also because of his transgression with Bathsheba. In Psalm 51, David says, I know my transgression, and v'chatasi negdi samid, my sin is always before me, meaning he always had this on his mind. So this idea of shiflut, this lowliness, is something we recognize in order to, say our sages, in order to feel how far we are away from Hashem. All of us should have this. And by feeling how far away we are from Hashem, we will be motivated to come close to Hashem, to return to him. Okay? We have to be aware of it, though. And we have to have the humility to act on it. Now, David wrote the Psalms and redacted them. He was also the primary editor of the ones that he didn't write, which show us how to do tshuva. All the Psalms, there are different aspects to each Psalm, but essentially, they're all about how to bring us closer to Hashem, to teach us how each of us can come closer to Hashem. And also, I'd like to talk about David's kingship, his Malchut, okay? We are right now in the last week of Sefirat HaOmer, and we are in the Sefira of Malchut, which is kingship. And this is the culmination of all the weeks of Sefirat HaOmer. And on the 50th day, there is no real 50th day, but on the 50th day, Shavuot begins. Once we've completed Malchut, Sheva Malchut, the permutation of the Sefira of kingship, kingship of kingship. And kingship, okay, is as a sphere, as a Kabbalistic concept, is related to a few things. It's related to emunah, to faith. It's related to tefillah, to prayer. And it's also related to shiflut, to lowliness. We can translate it here as humility. It's a fine point. It's important, but here we'll translate it as humility. A king must be humble, as I mentioned from Yoma, from the Talmud. The king must be humble. It's the quality that's going to make him a great leader, because he's going to understand that he has a responsibility to lead the people, to bring the people to live righteously, and that he himself is a conduit. He's a vessel for that. Okay. Now, this is just, I don't know, these ideas are so moving, and you can see how David inherits from his great grandmother Ruth, how he inherits this idea of appreciating the importance of remaining humble. Okay, now in Likutei Moharan lesson 14, Rebbe Nachman, King David's great-great-grandson, Rebbe Nachman teaches us that in order to acquire the Torah, we need to experience shiflut, okay? This sense of our own lowliness and distance from Hashem. And we have to experience, says Rebbe Nachman, 4 types of shiflut. Again, we could also translate it as humbleness or humility, but lowliness is more accurate. We have to experience 4 types of this in the material world. The first type is we have to recognize that we're lower than our sages, our teachers, and so on. Okay, those with great Torah knowledge. We have to be humble before them. We have to be humble before our peers, because who knows what they know? Who knows what greatness resides within them? Okay. We also have to be humble before those who appear to be lower than us. We don't know who's lowly. This is one of the mistakes, again, of Moab. Okay, we might think that this Jew over here, maybe he doesn't know much, he seems so lowly. Who knows what's in his heart? Who knows how he clings to Hashem? Who knows what his thoughts are and what his secret actions might be? We do not know. Okay. And we also, says Rebbe Nachman, have to be aware of our lowliness against the smallest conception of self. Now, this is an understanding that we maybe hold ourselves higher than we should, on the one hand, but on the other hand, Rebbe Nachman is famous for telling us to look for the good inside ourselves in the lesson of Zamra, Likutei Moharan 282, and to believe in ourselves, to have faith in ourselves. So we have to understand that these are not mutually exclusive ideas. And as a matter of fact, holy self-esteem, Jewish self-esteem, okay, requires holding these paradoxes in our minds and our hearts at the same time. Now, where can we see this? Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshishcha famously said that he would keep a piece of paper in his pockets, one in each pocket. One pocket was the paper which said, the whole world was created for me. And in the other pocket was the piece of paper that said, I am nothing, I'm dust and ashes, I'm a speck of dust. Okay. In order to remind himself that both ideas were true at the same time. Both these things are true. And this is the conception of self that each of us must develop, must work on developing. It's not always so easy. Okay. One of the things that can help us with this idea of shiflut, of this recognition of our lowliness, is Rebbe Nachman's lesson called Likutei Moharan Tinyana, lesson 12, where the Kedusha of Musaf on Shabbat, the Kedusha that we sing on the additional prayer on Shabbat, we ask, Aye Mekom Kavodo, where is the place of God's glory? And Rebbe Nachman answers it. He says, that is when those who are far away from Hashem return to him and come close. This is the greatest glory and honor of Hashem. It's the greatest thing we can do in this world. So how do we do it? So the way to do it is to remember that we are all far from Hashem, each in our own way. Okay? Just because you are Shomer Shabbat and you are living in a religious community and you are a wonderful human being, which I know you all are, doesn't mean that you don't have aspects of you that are very far away from Hashem. In the same way, somebody who hasn't yet converted to Judaism and who's on that path is also far away from Hashem. And this is like the two parallel lines that never meet. Our whole lives are chasing after and working on this idea that we are continually striving to come closer and closer to Hashem, recognizing that at any point in time, we might be far away from Hashem, and at the same time believing that we have good points, and we believe that we can do it. We can get there, whatever that next point is. Now, Rebbe Nachman also teaches us something very famous. The Yerida is for the sake of the Aliyah. And so, if there are moments in which we fall or we slip and we really feel lowly, it's in our faces, we have to remember that that is there in order so that we can get to the point of being far away from Hashem, picking ourselves up, coming higher and closer to Hashem in order to reveal Hashem's glory and honor in this world. And this is one of the multiple wonderful lessons that the story of Ruth has to teach us. So now we are going to do a Q&A, and I want to begin with a question that I was asked, which actually prompted me to focus this year for Shavuot, to focus it on this idea of shiflut and anava and lowliness and humility. Somebody wrote to me and said, Rebbe Nachman says that in order to acquire Torah, okay, in order to acquire Torah, one has to develop humility. If you want to have Torah, if you want to be connected to it, you have to be humble and you have to recognize your lowliness and so on and your distance from Hashem and so on. How do you acquire humility? So I think that one of the ways that we can look at this is to go back into the Sefirot and to look at the Sefira of Malchut and to see that kingship and royalty and sovereignty, as I mentioned before, don't just take humility, they also take emunah and tefillah, faith and prayer. These, again, are different aspects of what this Sefira that means kingship means. And the more we strengthen ourselves in faith, the more we realize that whatever happens to us is from Hashem, okay? The natural outcome of that is to be humble. So if someone isn't so polite to you, okay, maybe he's a little snobby to you, So nothing bothers us more than this kind of stuff. Most people are sensitive to this kind of thing. Immediately reminding yourself, oh, this is from Hashem. This is from Hashem. Hashem has decided that I need to go through this right now. Okay. Or things aren't working the way you want. And you can remind yourself, this is from Hashem. I have amunah, absolute faith and belief that whatever Hashem gives me is for my own good, even if I don't like it. This helps us not only enrich our relationship with Hashem, but also it helps us develop humbleness and humility and an awareness of the depth of our distance. Okay, we're always going to be distant on the one hand. Why? Because we're human beings. We're not God. And then on the other hand, we're also very close to Hashem. He loves us very much, and hopefully we love him very much. So again, we have this interplay of far and away and far and close and far and close and far and close. And then the other thing is tefillah. And what I would like to recommend, and I didn't have time, I really did have time, but I waited till the last minute to actually prepare this part of it. So I never got to it. I mean, in all honesty, I was going to sit down and look through Likutei Tefillot, translated in English by the Breslov Research Institute, the 50th Gate, the collection of prayers by Rebbe Nachman. I was really going to sit down and look through some prayers that specifically dealt with this issue, because there are many, but praying in your own words about whatever is on your mind and in your heart, making hibodedut, talking to Hashem, and also using some of Rebbe Nachman's prayers, which are terrific for this, as a jumping off point into your own prayers about Hashem. How can I develop these attributes? The attributes of Ruth. Ruth, I don't know, Ruth really speaks to me. I get so excited that it's time for Megillat Ruth. She's my favorite. I know I always say to her, this one's my favorite. That one's my favorite. She's my favorite. What can I say? So many lessons that this Megillah teaches us. And I want to say that, if you take some time and go to a Jewish bookstore, it's better for this to browse in a bookstore, but like a big Jewish bookstore, like Eichler's or something like this. And you look through all the books on Shavuot and all the books on Ruth. You'll be amazed at not only the midrashim, but the modern commentaries and so on. It's just so rich. It's endless. You could prepare for this months in advance. And then the other thing is Sefer Tehillim. Okay, if you want to acquire humility, say Psalms. And, my suggestion to you is, if the language, which even for modern Hebrew speakers is very difficult, it's an archaic type of Hebrew. This kind of Lashon Kodesh is very poetic and difficult, and it's even difficult to pronounce. I mean, it's just, Psalms they don't trip off the tongue. Okay, I would suggest that you get one with a really beautiful English translation. I use the interlinear a lot with Psalms frequently, and I also like Yitzchak Bell's The Power. I think it's called The Power of Psalms. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. Another beautiful, beautiful translation of Psalms. And is it quantity or quality? Right now, we're all crazily saying a lot of Tehillim for the Jewish people, for the hostages. Baruch Hashem. We had such good news, Motzi Shabbos. Such good news. I'm sure you are all sobbing along with me about the release of those 4 holy hostages, and sorrowfully the death of the general, I guess he was, who organized, or the captain who organized the raid. But this idea of sometimes just sitting down and saying a few verses from Psalms. Highlight the verses, put a little marker on the side to cover up the words, put a little marker on the side, perhaps a little kind of post-it note or something. A few verses that really speak to you about David's humility. And there are many, 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 many Psalms. And if King David, the great King David, the ancestor of Moshiach, could speak of his own humility, we all can certainly learn to be humble as well.